integral approaches, a deeper dive into the integral theories, integral philosophies, and integral practices. We saw from its etymology that integral can refer to something that has not been touched, not been damaged, not been altered. And from its common use in the language, it can refer to something that is whole, that is entire, something that works well together, that makes its different component part function well together, something that's well organized. It's something that is healthy in the sense of not being altered in its functioning or not lacking any of its component parts. The idea of integrality, if taken as an absolute or if taken as a material thing, is very, very easy to attack, or very easy to ridicule. Integrating everything into one set would be synonymous to including the entire universe. So any field that has as a goal to create a set so big that it could include everything would actually create no set whatsoever. It would create something that has no practical use. Eventually, one of the common critiques of the integral frameworks is past the point everything dissolves into this ocean of indifferentiation. If you try to include everything, you end up including nothing, because the set in which you try to bring things in so that it can include everything, you have made it the size of the universe. So that's one very common and very, very accurate critique. But the matter here is that it relates to the integrality as a material concept. Now, I'll use through this video an example of integral frameworks. I'll use just a tiny part of it. I'll use a very, very old framework to sort of map out and make sense and organize all the world, all the things and whatnot. And that's the old numerological or numeric matrix, or the scale of numbers from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 to 10,000 as a symbol for the ancient Taoist philosophy, for instance, of the infinity of manifestation. So as we saw, integral as including everything is somehow an absurdity. It creates a set that has no inclusion rule and no exclusion rule. So it creates an infinite and indefinite set. The other aspect of integral, as contrasted to inclusive, oftentimes in the language, the idea of integrating something is that you bring it inside and you structure it. You make it work together. You find it a place, a role, or you help it find its own. So including would be a passive bringing in of another element into a set. Integrating, in this meaning of a word, would be bringing in something into a system and finding it a useful role into the system. Or another way of seeing it would be bringing something into a map or whatever type of organization of information and structuring it, like organizing it with the other elements present. The third aspect of so there we find other critiques that are very relevant, and to my idea any integral framework has to include its own critics, its own shadows. It's one of the most basic aspects. You need to see what's behind you. The only way you can see it is by having the people that face you that look in the exact opposite direction, and people that have like tangential points of view that can see exactly behind you, which the person facing you cannot. They can describe and they can complete your picture of the world. On your own, any monopoly, any monolithic approach, monolithic point of view will lack this diversity. That is the only way to get a feel for the different aspects of things, especially the trail that you leave behind, the wake of one's boat, what happens as a secondary effect of your own movements, your own thoughts, your own ideas. So when we get back to the way of everything working together as an absolute, once again, it's both useless and sort of meaningless. Things do not or cannot work all together. You have things that will break to prevent type of motion. You have things that go in other directions and whatnot. Except if you create a totalizing and a totalitarian aspect that will force everything into your own direction. The actual diversity and the actual plurality of things will bring them by nature to do things that are not forcibly working well together. Some things will try to eat you, feed of you, predate you, and then others could support you, others will try to help you, whatnot. So there's this whole what we would call now an ecology or an ecosystem of relationship, and the integration there would describe the global functioning of the ecosystem. But the idea that everything works exactly together towards a goal or towards a function, something to do, that is easily accessible to us humans. Same, it's many aspects quite dangerous. No map can include, so you picture a map and you try to organize information on the map. So the map is already only one aspect of the ways of classifying information that you could find. You could do what we would think of as verbal maps, doing the song lines of the Aboriginals, for instance, but it would be the concept of map would not cover the entire concept of what a song line is by a lot. It's very, very different. So the map, I'll take as an analogy, practical analogy. I want to include all information on the map and make them work together all. So I want to present all information and I want to structure it. If I add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 layers of information on the same map, I will have a blank or black pool of ink absolutely unreadable and absolutely unusable. You need to select and limit the amount of information present on a given system so that it can be used, because what allows for its uses is the blanks, is the gaps, is the emptiness, that creates the background and the contrast. It's the old Chuang-Tzu idea that a house is defined by its walls and whatnot, but what gives it its actual use is the doors, is the space inside the rooms. So the shape is not what provides the if you create the house completely filled on the inside, it is no more a house except in appearance. It has the form of it, but it has none of its potential uses. And the same goes for this map. If you picture the integral frameworks as an attempt to map something, the idea of taking everything in and just fitting them on the same map will lead either to a complete inability to read the map, or it will lead also to a totalizing translation of very, very different concepts and fields into the same language that can suit the map. So this is also very important. If we try to translate everything, if we try to clarify everything and make them a huge commonality that allows for communication and community, then we face one problem. When everything is as one, it means that we have lost a lot of the diversity that provided the actual reason to be and the actual wealth of things. If there's only one type of person, or one person, everybody has the same tools, everybody has the same goals, everybody has the same tastes. It's very difficult to organize a complex system using only the same pieces. Say the same people will want to live exactly at the same place, will want to mate with the same partners, will want the same foods, and will reject the same refuse, the same garbage, same materials. In the same way, they will attract the same predators, same enemies, same parasites. So this diversity principle that we see in the study of systems, or the complex systems, or especially complex evolving systems, and that we see in the natural world or in the human world, this diversity is not for show. It is the only way to prevent this direct competition of things that are exactly the same in their propensities. So when we do an integral map or integral framework, integral theory or whatnot, it obviously cannot include everything, and it cannot twist things or mechanize things so that they all work together into the same types of mechanisms. That's another critique that's articulated very often, that the integral frameworks, for instance, emphasize one point of view, the point of view of well-educated WASP boomers, white people, whatnot, Westerners. And as most of the critics articulated against the integral framework, there's It's not even a modicum of truth. The critic itself is completely irrelevant if you take the integral approach as being a thing, a graspable entity. If the integrality is a material totality, then it's a totalitarian approach. It has to be. It will need to fit things into the bag. So you have one of two options. Either there is no bag because the bag is undefined, as we saw with the all-inclusive or all-including aspect of integrality, or if the bag is defined as a clear border, as rules of inclusion, rules of exclusion, as definite categories fitting inside, then you will need to fit all the things that you want to include into these categories so that they can seem to work together, or they seem to fit together. The same goes for integrality as like complete wholeness of a unit. So integrality can be the unity, the all-encompassing unity, or it can be depicted as health, say integrity, and there it's the same idea but at a smaller scale. It's the completeness or entirety or functionality of one element, one unit, which would be one subunit of the all-encompassing unity. So there you'd have the idea of something being unbroken, meaning that it has all of its material components, of being undamaged in its functionality. Things work well together into the unit because there is no change into the programs, the directions, or the materials comprising this system. So there the idea of complete health, complete wholeness, complete entirety of one being can be attacked very easily by displaying the fact that any beings are not closed systems. In most of the modern approaches, you'd end up with ideas like Prigozhin's idea of the word eludes me. So they're depicted as a flow instead of a set thing. You lose millions and billions of cells of bacteria every day. You are like a whirlpool. You are not the same water, although there's a continuity in the perception of the shape. The overall shape, it doesn't stay the same, but it relates. It can be seen as you can find sufficient commonalities so that you create a concept of unity of this shape. Same with individuals. You can find commonalities, sufficient continuity of features, of memories, of sufficient conservation, so that it seems that what you are now is the same as what you were as a kid. Although, in theory, for instance, you have no cell remaining, or very few cells remaining. Maybe you have some conflicting theories about it. But no matter what, obviously, if you were a baby this big and you're now 2 meters 10, maybe even if you kept the entire baby at the center, you are not the same sum total as you were. Hence, you are not the same total of relationship, of capabilities, of prehensions, of potentialities for relationships than you were. So the idea of integrality, as integrity, as complete fidelity to a defined identity, is in itself, if it's thought of as a thing, as a sort of a material idea, again we find very fast many absurdities. But what I will argue here is that this approach to the critique of integrality, same as many critiques we articulate against each other, especially for ideas or whatnot, we take the same stance as the dominant culture, and we consider things as matter. We extend the realm of matter, of static beingness, of states, to processes, dynamics, and to directions, meanings, intentions, and whatnot. So this already, what I'm depicting here, is part of the integral framework that I started to explicit. This integral framework, numerical framework, we'll use today only the trinity aspect of the tripartite or triad aspect of it. For many different reasons, like it could be explicited duality. So in oneness, there's no differentiation whatsoever, there's no contrast, there's no existence in unity. Nothing is out of, away from, or differentiated from something, if all is one. When you have duality, out of breaking out of oneness into two, or out of taking the oneness and opposing it to its to a background that gives its shape. So oftentimes it's unity of the manifested over the blank canvas of vacuity, of emptiness, infinity of potentiality, unmanifested, the wuji, undefined infinity, whatnot. So oneness is useless and is for thought. It's actually the reverse of oneness, and emptiness are the reverse of a mental process. There's no information, there are no shapes, there are no differences. It's a white wall, you write everything in white on the white wall. First you would need to exist, to be something different. But even if you picture into this unity many things existing, but existing as undifferentiated, so they have, if the only property is oneness, all the things that can be are also one. They're also oneness. They're also whiteness. If you picture it as a blank board, and all the writings will be white too. So they appear without any contrast, without any difference. There's nothing to perceive. There's nothing to grasp with your senses and seize and interpret. So hence, the beginning of perception would be, the beginning of existence would be the division or the inclusion of oneness with emptiness, for instance, or the breaking down of oneness into what's closer to emptiness, closer to the center, closer to the unmanifested, closer to the spread of the manifestation through differentiations, through the reiteration process of where the one becomes the background and something else arises in the middle. But if you have only two objects in the same way, they can compare only to each other. There's no reference frame whatsoever. There are no external point. You have two people debating something. There's no arbitrary. There's no one to be able to side with one or the other, or articulate one's thought as opposed to the other, or there are no triangle relationship that would allow for actual comparison of something. So it can be said in most of the cosmologies that the beginning of manifestation is not even duality, it's trinity. Trinity, you get the third leg of the stool that will allow for it to stand on its own. And this trinity depicts the meeting point of two principles, two overarching principles. So it's either the meeting point, the two circles touch, where they touch is the third point, two sides of the mountain touch, where they touch is the Taiji, the supreme ultimate, but also the supreme end of something, the end of its definition, the beginning of the next one, as opposed to Wuji, the absence of ending point, the absence of extreme that will mark the time when something becomes something else or something goes into something else. So now when we have this trinity, it can be this inclusion point, it can be the medium in between, or the intermediary. You have a line joining the two spheres, and this line is the tool, the mean, the medium that link them. It can be also with this spatial depiction or analogy, it can be the middle point, the balancing in between both influences, which can be also the balancing point means also the negating point of both influences, where they counteract each other. Or it can be the overarching unity that brings back duality. Duality is this creation of unresolvable contrast. Something is other. It's the creation of otherness, principial otherness. So principial otherness cannot of its own be brought back to principial sameness, identity. Alterity and identity are by definition opposites, but you can reunite them into an overarching or wider frame, or higher level holarchy, higher level nested system or integrating system. And there these two will not be complete dual opposites, unlinked together and unreconciled together. They will be two poles of a relationship, two opposite poles of a complementary relationship, for instance. This you find again in many aspects of the old philosophies, old cosmologies, old mythologies, and you find it in more recent times and in other pathways in the Hegelian dialectic, for instance. In some aspect, like the Hegelian dialectic lacks part of the fluidity of the Taoist Chinese thought, for instance, but it brings many other things. So we get to this very partial framework, trying to make sense of everything by using a number, and the number is 3, and the number is linked to in our modern perception, it's linked to 3 things, but in all the ideas, all the philosophies, for instance, that were not materialistic, it can be 3 aspects of matter, but it can be 3 aspects of change, 3 elements, 3 aspects of transformation, 3 formative or creative principles. So in the same idea we have the 5 elements or 5 phases or 5 formative principles, or 4 in the Western approach. The Chinese approach, you would have 5. So it's wood, fire, earth, metal, and water most of the time. In the Western world, it's air, same fire, water, and earth. But the idea of the principle, what the content you give, the name you give, is not really so important. These ideas are found in the exact same ways in the study of the Earth, for instance, although the element theory is depicted as rejected by the focusing of modern science. The focusing of modern science, you look down and zoom into things, and you do not find them made of material fire, material earth, material air, material water, whatnot. But if you take them as what they were, either formative principles or processes or densities. When I say what they were, these categories were not used at all in the time people thought about it. But this framework, for instance, would still refer now to the gaseous phase, to the solid phase, to the plasma phase for fire, for instance, or some energy aspects of it, or to the liquid and viscous phase or elastic aspects if you were taking life. So they would still relate to some of these old ideas, and they would relate to it because we come from it in many ways. So when we translate three aspects to depict the entirety of the world, we can use many different meanings of the three as principle. So very common associations of freeness would be inside, outside, in between, relationality or interface. It could be what's in front, what's in the back, what's in the middle, or what's at the side. Up, middle, down, same level, higher, lower, to my left, to in front of me, to my right, before, during, after, past, present, future. If I depicted the world as a space, all that's below me, all that's around me, same level somehow, all that's above me, sky, earth, or sky, earth is the below, life or the human realm is in between. So you find this in many cosmologies or many what we call philosophies or worldviews. So in the Chinese aspect, the Chinese big analogical system, you'll find the Tiandiran idea: sky, earth below, in the middle, the linking point, the joining point, the middle point, or the offspring of the interplay of these two principal forces or processes or directions or intentions would be the human realm. And the human realm can be extended to all life, all that's around it. You take it to another level, it's macrocosm, the big universe, the big order of things, or the order of big things. Microcosm, the order of small things, or the small universe. And you'd have a mediocosm, like the intermediary, what we call meso in biology, for instance, or in ecology. Macroorganism, microorganism, and you have mesofauna, for instance. You seldom say mesoorganism, but the idea would be the same. Things of the same order, same scale, same size as you, things that are smaller, things that are bigger, now it relates these three aspects, this three-parted vertical organization, is translated also into elements: the air, the space, the less dense, more airy, more changing, more the ocean in which you can dive through looking up at night or during the day, where all things are changing, moving all the time, while Earth will seem to be relatively more static as compared to our duration of perception. Earth static, air very changing, very airy, the light, the interplays of light, clouds, the movements of the stars, and in the middle, the human realm, which would be more fluid, gas, solid, fluid, for instance. And these are analogical associations. It's very common in many societies. The Descola framework for cultures, which in the same way as any other integral framework, so it's trying to map out the greatest number of cultures and worldviews he has encountered in his ethnological work, and he tries to map them out on the same map, and using a matrix that can organize them together. So it's trying to bring them into the same world, and the ways to do it is it takes two aspects: the internality and the externality, which is one of the two aspects we met. As I depicted, if he had wanted to make a more complex matrix, he would have taken three aspects: internal, external, relational, for instance. But for now, oftentimes you try to simplify these maps. So the first tool would be to make a map with 2 and 2, internal, external, same, different. Perception of the sameness of interiorities and difference of externalities. Interiorities can be also translated in one of its potential meaning as consciousness, perception, subjective experience, and exterior can be translated as physical world, matter. So interiority or body too. Sameness of internal experience, difference of bodies. That leads to what he calls animism. The world is made of animas, souls, or principles that animate things. Everything is animated by this. Even a stone would be inhabited by this animated or animating power. But then the difference would not be the internal aspect of it, but it would be the external, the bodies in which the souls materialize or incarnate. The bodies will express the soul differently. So the internality is in principle the same, but can be expressed differently when it's wearing different body clothes, for instance, different material garments. And the reverse of it would be difference, so sameness in externality, sameness of matter, sameness of bodies, and difference in internality. So that would lead to what he calls the naturalist worldview, or naturalist ontology. Ontology meaning narrative of what is, depiction of all the entities existing into a framework or philosophy. So opposing the animated world to the what's called naturalist there, but the way he uses nature is akin to what we would call materialist. There is no commonality of spirits, of animating or souls, animating principle. There's a commonality. The beings are made of the same clothes. They're made of the same matter. Although the shapes of the matter may differ, the actual components, the smaller elements that you can extract from this matter are the same. The fabric is the same. But then in the naturalist or materialistic framework, there's a difference between the interiority of all beings, all things, and the humans. This is the old Descartes dualism of body and mind, and overlapped with the human-centric aspect that came with it. So for Descartes, the human soul was the only aspect linked to the ideal realm of God and whatnot. The rest of it, including animals, were matter structured in mechanism. The fourth aspect is difference of bodies, difference of interiorities. So for Descartes, it describes the analogical or analogic ontology. So the analogic ontology describes all these all-encompassing what he calls analogical systems that you find in India, China, Mesoamerica, in the medieval periods or antiquity. All these systems with these links between numbers, things, colors, whatnot. The analogy is the ability to find sameness in appearing something that appears different. Another way of thinking about it is these systems are both analogical. They evoke other things they share the same. They have different sets, but in the different sets, some commonalities are found that create transversal subsets. So in the analogical idea, every being is unique. There's no commonality. There's no actual identity rather than commonality. There's no sameness. Things change all the time. So this is the depiction of Descartes in the actual cultures. You would have widely some related ideas, but very different ideas too. But so there's this idea that we can create commonalities by identifying unifying aspects or other sets into the perceived sets. So you can weave a huge fabric of relationships, of similarities in between things that are in nature completely unique and different. The fourth aspect of the ontology of Descartes is sameness of interiority, sameness of exteriority, and he relates it to totemism, where things in nature, as he explicits them, would be the same, but they are the same. They are differentiated by relationality in the origination, the link to a place, to a dream ancestor, whatnot. This is a map, and this map would explicit. You could sort of map out the world as always, you need to translate it into the concept that I used to draw the map. So in this way, if you do only that, and if you confine all concepts, all ideas into these maps, you're impoverishing immensely the world. Totemism is much more than all this. The ideas of interior, exterior may not be may have been very different in different times, may have been different between tribes. Even the idea of common mythology and cosmology, as was experienced by some researchers interacting with the Sand Bushmen in the Kalahari, someone looking for mythology, trying to find the origin myths and whatnot, because he learned in his courses of anthropology that it's one defining features of cultures. Culture being another concept that's brought into these people. So the guy ended up with, after a long time of trying, ended up with someone taking pity on him, or just enjoying the joke and telling him a big creation story, the entire thing. And at the end of it, when the guy was taking note, he asked him if he enjoyed it, and tell him, then come back tomorrow, I'll have another one. So all the things we perceive, so what I depicted is not a reality of the world either, because these are still modern people. The modern people living different lifestyles, influenced and massively touched and crushed by the modern frameworks, but still. So the analogical idea that you find in all these numerical systems, in all these geometrical systems that are widespread through the world, oftentimes in fairly complex societies, they will depict things through analogy, symbolism, or resonance, not only analogy. So symbolism is sort of a language of, it can be a coded language, something stands for something else, that's pre-organized, predefined. It can be also a language eliciting interpretation and eliciting the creation of meaning. But the last one is in many ways more important, because all those analogies and symbolisms, they are practices that are very common for us now. We do that all the time. The only idea that a word can stand for a thing is in some ways an analogy, because there's a sound. How would a sound or a shape, written sign, how could it actually be or describe the whatever level of reality of a string, a bunch of fibers woven together? So there's this whole field of the abstraction of language, or the ideation, materialization of ideas into the world, and the role that the name of things will play in this creation myth or creation story. But the resonance aspect is very interesting too, because some things are felt through other senses to link together, and these can be experienced using different tools, the felt body sensations. But in modern times, oftentimes what will be used are pendulums, eliciting a tiny internal response. And same, you have a huge billions of critics of all these things. Oftentimes the critics are weak because they're not based on practice. In the same way, many of the critics of of what we call science now, like experience-based science, or even not experience-based, but metadata-based science. Oftentimes the critiques that are articulated tend to be one-sided, and we tend to not take at least 12 points of view to map around something. Hence, there's always the feel by the people receiving the critique, first, that the intent of the critique is to destroy their ways of being, their ways of seeing, and replace them by a monopoly, by a monolith of pre-existing truth. And the other aspect is it's felt very fast that the people who articulate the critics are lying. They are lying in at least by they're lying oftentimes by intention. You change the actual content of what people say or how they say it to make the things that appear the most ridiculous stand out. So you straw man the other point of view, and you steel man your point of view. You erase all the incongruencies. There's no system of thought that is self-coherent, that can explain itself. So you have all these things about Gödel's, some interpretations of Gödel's theorem and whatnot, but it would not matter. In most of the ways, you will not be able to evade the fact that you're using mathematical logic, you're using numerical math, you're using any type of narrative. You end up with a world that you create by expliciting postulates. You explicit the creative principles of the world, the rules that apply there. And these rules are unprovable. Another way of seeing it, we're in the middle of the aquarium. We're trying to make sense of the aquarium from the inside and trying to project through imaginative thinking and whatnot. We're trying to distance ourselves and take a wider scope. But we're still in the aquarium. There's no way for us to depict the beyondness. What lies beyond the actual frame of our perception or reality or whatnot, is in many ways ungraspable to us. Although through time it is very possible to identify patterns of beingness, patterns of relationship that will have a conservation through time and that will help to actually access abilities. And so that's drifting again, my own specialty, and let's try to get back to the theme, although it was still the theme due to the relationship with what I described as the critics of integral theory and the counter critics of integral people trying to use integral frameworks and criticizing the critics. Oftentimes they tend to be biased by not actually steel manning the opposite point of view instead of one's own. So when we get back to these analogical frameworks, free would be the number of the manifestation, the triangle, the first proportion. So it's the first, if you line the three dots, it's the first actual line that you create, because in between two you could create any number of lines. In between three you have to align. So that's what you do for shooting a target, for instance, or aiming at something. So with these 3 points aligned, you can compare the distance or relationship between one and the second, with the second and the third, and the first and the third. So that gives you the first proportion, the first ratio. Ratio would be linked to this idea of cutting things and comparing them. A proportion is a part per something. It's the portion allocated to one as compared to a portion allocated to another. So now when we get to these systems in 3, one of the modern depiction of this is the trinity of matter, energy, information. So this system relates historically to other older systems, Greek systems, to Chinese system. It does not relate in the original timeline, maybe, but it would still relate. It resonates at least, or it elicits a comparison between the system of the small Earth, sky, and heart, or Earth, sky, and middle, that you find in the microcosm. We saw that you had Tian, Di, Ren, sky, Earth, beings. The inside one being, you would have the same. The sky would be the more hairy, the more changing, the less dense aspect of it. So the subjective aspect, its mental aspect. The earth would be the more stable, more dense, more easily felt aspect of it, which would be the material aspect. In between would be the more living aspect, related to oftentimes the breath of life, so to all the flows that feed or that create the body. All the fluids that will create these forms that Prigogine mentioned. So when we get to these 3 aspects, we can expand them: matter, energy, information. You get back to, say, for the Chinese cosmological aspect, information could be thought of as the yang, the light, the ideation of something, the things that are put into motion. Yang could be related to energy too. The yin would be the divine darkness, the primal ocean of potentiality. It can be thought of as the one too, like the one as the unity of the manifested. When you break it down, you consider it not as matter but as energy. It's the sea, the primal sea of chi, but undifferentiated chi, potentiality for creation, manifestation, change. So that's the nature of manifestation. From there, you would have in the Greek philosophy, for instance, you'd have a link between eidolons, shapes, principal archetypes, in the ideal realm of the Platonic philosophy, for instance, and getting into the Kora, the sea of materiality, or the mud of materiality. So you have an undefined material that is given shape to by an informing principle and via an activity, via change that we call energy. Energy, in the wide sense that I use it, is the ability to generate change, to prevent change, or to alter change. It's a depiction of its function, not of its nature, obviously, but the nature is the principle of movement, change, action. So when we get to this trinity, we can infer that all worldviews will be based on more on one of these aspects. You could say, if you picture a body, and the lower part of the body would be linked to the earth, the middle part of the body, especially heart, lungs, but also the intestines, because they receive the food from outside and from the top here. The breath from the light comes from the eyes, the air comes from the nose, and the matter comes from the mouth. So all these will transmute, will transform into the middle part of the body that is linked to energy, and the higher part of the body, closer to, for vertical beings, closer to the sky, is closer to these ideation principles, the feeling of consciousness. Although in many ways all these are distributed all around. So it can be said that the center of gravity is moving up or down. Every philosophy, every being will have in some ways these three categories and many subdivisions. And still, so all societies perceive somewhat something that's akin to matter for us. They do live in the material world. They are killed by colons' weapons or invaders' weapons. But still, they perceive, some will perceive more of the becoming, or the changing, of the creation, the change, alteration, and movements of things. So what's linked to the category we call energy. And in modern, even in Western philosophies, Western approaches, you would have materialistic philosophies, or philosophies of blocks, ideas as blocks that are articulated together. You have all these, even the constructivist and deconstructivist will tie us back to the material world and the idea of organizing building blocks together to create structure, and then discovering that the deconstructivist approach would be discovering that these blocks that are used to create all the big construction of civilization or philosophies or whatnot, they are not absolute, they are not the only blocks available. The buildings we see are not the only buildings that can be. Concrete is not overarching. You had societies building with stones, building with mud, building with living structures. You can have all this, so that's this deconstructivist. But this deconstructivist idea is a philosophy, so it's linked to the mental realm, it would be linked to the information stratum, and at the same time it's deeply influenced by more materialistic societies. So it's idealism fed by materialism. The same goes for obviously for materialism and all the offsprings, like what we call mechanism, reductionism. So they all spring from an analogy where you picture the way you see the world and think the world. You picture it through what you do and what you interact with, more than through what you dream, what you think, or your ideas. And you decide. That's quite interesting. We picture the idea that we're not deciding what the world is, we're discovering. So the experimental sciences were discoveries that could show that some of the affirmations that were made about the world were factually wrong in the material sense. Now, things would go many different ways, but first, many of these affirmations, if you go back sufficiently in time and in depth, they are not themselves materialistic affirmations. People are not describing, when people used the elements in antiquity, they were not necessarily describing only matter. The category of matter isolated, even substance, the word substance that we use as a synonym to matter in many ways. The word had a widely different meaning in some of the Greek philosophies of the time. It was not dead matter, dead, inert, unanimated matter. It was felt as something changing, evolving. And at the same time, you could find instances where people thought in ways that are nearly the same as some of the ways we think now. Nearly the same even needs to be very taken with a grain of salt, because nearly the same would be in just some of the implications of the idea, some lines of what the idea could mean for something. But we do not think only like this, we think in networks of relationship. And the networks of relationship that tie a word or any practice, any idea to millions of others in an untold story, an untold tapestry of concepts, words, ideas, histories. These have not been the same in all the different times of the world. So it cannot be said that even though you would find thinkers that would think about the world as made of small unbreakable pieces that we could call atomos, that cannot be broken, even though it can be related to the atomistic worldview later, especially since the atomistic worldview was expanded from these former ideas. But still, Democritus or Lucretia didn't perceive the world at all the way any modern person would. And the people that started these theories in the 19th century, they didn't think at all the way we think now. Their practices were different, the frameworks of the logics were different. So you have commonalities, and the commonalities must not be lost sight of. If we lose sight of any commonality between, so we destroy entirely this idea that there could be an integrative or integral striving, an integral direction. But if we lose the differences, then we create this critique of the integral and integrative approaches, which is we create a formless and featureless goo. So the three aspects, energy, so matter, energy, information, can be tied to many analogies: the plan, the work, and the workers, or the work done by the workers, and the tools and whatnot, and the actual matter, the building blocks of a house, and the material aspects of the worker, the material aspects of the tools, would be a very common example. If you take a flow, a process, for instance, a river, you would have the bed of a river. So it can be done many different ways. So one would be the bed of a river, the infrastructure, the dense part that defines where the flow will go through, and that will canalize the flow, and in some ways it will coalesce and concretize the flow, because it will concentrate it so that it can appear. So that's the infrastructure. The structure would be the water itself, the flow, the energy, the changing aspect, the moving aspect, carrying things, changing things, changing and shaping the actual background and its infrastructure at the same time. And the last one would be the direction, the destination, the sense of the flow. Sense making here would be the very practical direction. Another aspect is this sense making is based on tensions, difference of potential, and this tension would be tied to the intentions, although it's not an etymological link, it's analogical or a play with words. But the play with words are not to be dismissed either. They are part of the way we think about the world. So in this aspect you see again matter, energy, information. The critiques that are made, we drifted quite a bit, but the critiques that are made to the integral theory are made by depicting the integral process or integral direction as an integral matter, integral blocks. So integrality as a block is an infinite block, so useless. Integrality as working together things is an infinite machine whose workings are so intricate and at such a level that you do find the commonalities. So it's the same as the critique of Whitehead, for instance, of the general relativity of Einstein, with his saying that since general relativity was warping the time-space frames that are used to measure the actual events that we can use to compare theories together and to actually prove, meaning test theories together. If you, by using a framework that was destroying the global matrix of measurement, of possible measurements, you were like Einstein for Whitehead was creating a theory where to know anything, to be able to measure, to compare anything, you had to know everything. So you had to know all the interacting fields of gravity warping the fabric of space-time in all these different ways. You had to know everything so that you could make sense of your measurements, because your measurements disappeared as a grid, as sort of an objective reference frame where you could compare things. So if you have no homogeneity of space or time, it will be very difficult to use a unit to measure it. It's the same for the actual world prior to the theorization of distance, for instance. If you walk, 1 kilometer means nothing. Means nothing. It means precious little. If you have to walk 1 kilometer in a swamp, or in a thick jungle, closed jungle, or in an open forest, or on a plain, featureless plain, or towards in a plateau where you have one very clear point of view that allows you to maintain the shortest path. The time spent and the effort and the feeling of density of events of all these different trips will be immensely different. When we created the framework, so one idea articulated by Walter Hong and then Marshall McLuhan was that in some ways the fragmentation and the theorization, the abstraction of space was into self-similar units was made much more natural through the use of the printing press. If you take the same size of page, same size of characters, and you split the page into these many characters, then you can substitute one for the other. You can have a fairly regular arrangement, and you would have a distance of such the distance would be regular all over. You get used to it for long enough, or you apply it to your world, and you erase the touches, you make things flat, you put markers of distances in between, you create flat paths and whatnot, and you make the feeling of actuality of the universal frame of measurement, you make it a lived experience, while before it's only a complete abstraction. So the critics of integral approaches, or integral theories, or integral philosophies will say that they try to grab everything, hence get to the problem of dissolving everything, of making maps that are way too big. But as I mentioned before, the exact reverse argument could prevail. If you take very, very tiny maps, you make the world, so your navigation will be a map of all the meters of pathways. So it's a map made by ants, for instance, or small organisms that would live on these distances, and they will map out the actual details, the actual components, the real components at their scale of what's happening on this meter. And now you try to create a map that's not that's a real map, that's not an overarching all-inclusive map. So you say we need to go to the smallest scale of the smallest beings, and they will describe the actual granularity and differences, and not broad approximation and generalizations of things. And then you link these maps together, and you try to make your map of, say, a city. Your map is useless. One step is the size of one map. It's the reverse process of the fractal idea of measuring the coast of England and discovering that the measurement changes with the scale of the measure used, the unit of measure. If you put 2 markers every 1,000 kilometer, then you'd get a fraction of 1 unit, and very rough fraction. If you put 1 marker every 100 kilometers, you will count the length, and it will be quite small compared to what it is if you take it you put 1 marker every meter, and then you have to get much closer. So before you were drawing lines in between edges, now you try to follow the edges at 1 meter space intervals. But now you do the same at 1 centimeter, 1 millimeter, and the world becomes infinite, and you go down and down and down to infinity in theory, and the actual length, the perimeter of anything becomes potentially infinite. And there you get back to a different idea of the Zeno paradox. But the Zeno paradox is countered by some aspects of maths with like won't go into. But it doesn't matter, but because the idea would still be the same. Whether you're mapping very small or mapping very big, whether you're mapping very specialized and very isolated, or you're mapping very generalized, very connected, whether you're using focal vision or peripheral vision or distributed vision, trying to get to spread your awareness equally on all the space you're covering. The actual use will determine the actual tool. So the use that you have, the need that you have for one type of practice will determine which tool, which way of using your perception, or which tool of perception is applicable. You do not use a telescope to look at microbes. You use a microscope that will twist the visual world in a way that makes accessible to you something that is much smaller than the scale at which your eyes are what your eyes are meant for. Because in your life as an hominid, you had nothing to do with the microbial world. In the same way, you had not much to do with supernovae. They were not at your scale of perception, they were not at the scale of your existence. They affected you, but not in a way with which you could interact. So it meant nothing to have a perception, an ability to grasp information, make sense of it, without anything you could do about things. Now the extension of the human sensorium via the media and via the spread of knowledge and whatnot, stories that were depicting other aspects of the world. This made possible or made useful the various tools that at first oftentimes had no practical uses. Oftentimes they had specific practical uses, but not for individuals. Not all people needed a new model of the stars to map their course through the oceans. So, to wrap these ramblings. I know it's sometimes problematic to follow me, and I'll try after a while, when I get more used to this medium, to organize more of the content so that maybe it's more easily understandable, more clearly transmitted. But so now the depiction of the integral framework I was making in this video can be summarized. Surprisingly, you can use any tool. So you use a tool like the triad of the big cosmological or numerological analogic systems, and you describe the world in 3 very, very wide and general categories. But these 3 categories are at the scale of your lived experiences, and they have practical uses. If you understand that to plan a flow system, or you need to do whatever practical thing, you will build a house, or you will do a garden, or you will plan the pathways for a house or a city or whatnot. If someone tells you that to do that you need to look at what's below, at the ground, you need to look at what's above, the sky, the weather, the sun, the climate, the winds, and you need to look at what's around, the landscapes, the living organisms moving through it, or standing there. So these ideas will actually prove useful. If you compare to an absence of idea, an absence of reminder that you would need to do that, if you have someone who tells you in the same way that you need to think about what was there, what is there now, and what will be there, it will eventually lead you into directions of actual relationship, actual actions on the world that can prove more useful, more efficient, or more meaningful, or open at least open some pathways for you. Although these are very, very broad and generic terms that are not on their own depicting any specific content, they describe broad directions that can be accessed. And the same will go if you say that to consider integral theories, you would need to consider them as informations, as dynamics, processes, actions, flows, or as actual entities, things that exist, systems, blocks of ideas. If you criticize the blocks of integral theory without taking into account the fact that maybe they are used and they are useful as a direction, it's the same with I may not be able to integrate everybody and everything into a working society, but there's a world of difference if I display in my society the intention of including and integrating, making people work together, making them find their place or express their own treasure. It will make a world of difference compared to a society where I have no intent whatsoever about it, or worse, where I have every intent to exclude and and break down any potentiality of things working out well between communities, for instance, or between people, between individuals, between ideas. So I mentioned in another video that a word takes a lot of meaning and appears more clearly when the opposites of its ideas manifest their own shadows. When things disintegrate, when the general way of feeling others or otherness is to exclude it and to try to damage it or try to depict it by removing some parts that would be maybe more appreciated by people. So I'll keep the worst and get rid of the best when depicting such ideological enemy, for instance, or contender. When you do that massively, you're multiplying vector forces that go in a direction, if you consider this in the energy aspect of it. So if you consider it in a static, so blocks and units and reductionist aspect, you see just these things and you would see just the landscape they create together. If you consider them as flows, as actions, they're weaving something, they're changing things, they're shaping the landscape. They are not the landscape. They are actively creating a landscape. So I can use the debasing of the other, the othering process with othering without belonging in the John Powell aspect. I can use this and say that it's what the world is. It's what things are. Things are. I can depict the world, and I will see a lot of conflict. I will see a lot of opposition. I take these as blocks, put them on my map, and on my map I will say, okay, the world is this. The world is opposition. The world is this. The world is not integrated. It's not working together. People are working against each other at all scales. Particles are breaking down and whatnot. So I can do that. I could do the reverse. I could look at the world, see all the things, like especially in our times, when people express ideas about division and whatnot. And while living and using tools that are, for better or worse, they are the constructs of the mondialized world. They are unthinkable prior to that, due to the access of materials, due to the process of multiplication of knowledge spread through the open source community that was called science, and that's now branched out into the private sectors and the more old style academic sharing of research. But what I do when I integrate, when I try to make very general maps, is not to resolve the world into, is not to turn the map into the territory, to take the Korzybski's quote. But it is an intention to carry an action that brings things together. This action of bringing things together, if we tie it again to the three levels, attraction, repulsion, conservation, for instance, another instance of the use of three levels to depict the world, I'm tying this process of integrating, I need to integrate it into a process that includes its opposite. So I need a disintegrating anabolic and catabolic processes into a metabolic process. So I need to break down things to recreate novelty. I need the death process so that the building blocks of life, for instance, can be recombined into other assemblies. But I need this assembly process. I need the reuniting, I need the reintegrating of broken pieces together to make new things. And to do that, I need to integrate tiny pieces that are different and see how they can be united, be included, and work, function together, exist together into a greater unity that includes them, that transcends and includes them. The same goes for ideologies, ideas. So right now we have both huge spread of the information era. You have the amount of potential information spread every day is greater than what was shared for centuries or millennia prior to that, in one of its aspects, because you have many other layers, and there it would be very, very debatable. The amount of actual felt sensation of the relationship with the elements in the natural world, for instance, is crumbling into nothingness. But the other aspect is you have a crazy amount, you have access to biggest studies on all the subjects. So it's a wealth of information. At the same time, in this wealth of information is a huge wealth of information about dislocation, about negating other points of view, blaming each other, othering each other, abusing each other, killing each other. And this, in the same way, this content that's perceived in the narratives of a mondialized and all integrating and all dissolving mondialized world, globalized world, any movements toward breaking down into particulate identities can be expressed as a destruction of a greater. It's isolationism. It's moves towards the past, moves towards a more primitive idea. But the process that was described for the integrative framework applies to say the colonial movement was an integrative framework, but not in, it was integrating in trying to make the world one unit, but one unit that not integrative, it was an all-inclusive framework. You tried to bring everything in one set, but in bringing everything in one set, you're reducing and simplifying everything to one worldview, to one economy, one type of policy and everything. You erase the past in many ways, maybe not as deeply as some cultural revolutions tried, but still somewhat strongly. You have, if you look at the story of ideas depicted in science courses, sometimes, like especially very simplified science courses, it's very, very, very poor depiction. People of the past may have been dead, so it doesn't mean, as Eckhart Tolle said, maybe that it's not because they're dead that they're clever, but the reverse holds true too. It's not because people are dead that they were stupid. It's not because things are old that they are less refined and whatnot, they are not comprised of the same components you used to, but they have some thinkers, some systems. They are very, very deep, and they would be very difficult to actually disprove, at least using the level at which they were articulated. So they would be very difficult to disprove, because basically they are not set into this, there's no shared world of ideas. The ideas are different. It's impossible in rhetoric to prove or disprove something if the postulates and the categories used in language and the syntax and grammar are not the same. You need commonalities to communicate. Disproving something is a communication. Debasing something is not a communication. You can say whatever about Christian people, or about scientists, or about terrorists, or whatever, with precious little experience of what the others live, of the fields of constraints that shape them. It's very difficult to get past the most basic abuse or othering process. But still, as mentioned, these movements that are perceived as bad movement towards death, disintegration, breaking down, these things, in many ways, they are necessary to counterbalance the, say, for mondialization, the all-including force, and forcing and blending everything. And so that will be it for now. We'll try to go deeper into more specific applications later. But if you survived, good on you.